The different parts of an assessment, opportunities for incorporating multilingualism. I've heard so much about multilingual assessment, and I know it's probably a good idea. Isn't it difficult? I understand your concerns, but perhaps if we talked about the different parts of an assessment, you'd be less anxious. You would perhaps see that there is not only one way of incorporating multilingualism in assessments. In fact, there are several ways in which we could incorporate multilingualism into our assessments. Should we then discuss parts of an assessment? Yes, please. Parts of an assessment. The different parts of an assessment include instructions, input, expected response, and the rubric. Let us discuss each of these parts in more detail. Instructions. It would not make sense for an assessment not to have instructions. So as part of an assessment, the instructions tell the students what they need to do in order to complete the task. Examples of instructions include: describe what you see in the picture, calculate the value of x in the following equation, explain the condensation process in the water cycle. Input. An assessment may include an input. Where it is available, the input is the material or data that students need to examine in order to carry out the instructions or answer the question. The material that serves as input varies across disciplines and includes, but is not limited to, a piece of data, a drawing, or a reading. Let us look at some examples of inputs in relation to the instructions on the previous slide. In this example, the picture of the scenic garden would be referred to as the input, as the students would not be able to answer the question, describe what you see in the picture without this picture. 2x minus 5 equals 19 would be the input in this case, as it shows the students which value of x they are trying to calculate. In our last example, the image shows the different stages of the water cycle with the red arrow pointing towards the condensation stage. This would be considered the input, as it is what the students need to look at in order to answer the question. This is the part of an assessment where the student demonstrates the knowledge they have in relation to the instruction. Let us look at some examples of expected response. As we previously said, expected response allows the students to demonstrate their abilities to answer the question. In this example, we can see the student attempting to answer the question and solve for x. This is another example of an expected response, as we can see the student attempting to answer the MCQ questions and demonstrate their knowledge. We're not done yet. Remember, we added a fourth part. By a rubric, we mean a coherent set of criteria for learners' work that includes descriptions of levels of performance quality on the criteria. Here we see an example of a rubric showing students what they need to do in relation to introduction in order to get a mark that is exceptional, satisfactory, or underdeveloped. What they need to demonstrate with respect to knowledge of the relevant concepts in order to get a mark that is exceptional, satisfactory, or underdeveloped, and so on. It is important to note that the rubric is not only for the teacher to consult while marking. For the student, it is both an orientation tool and a feedback tool. When given out to the students along with an assessment task, a rubric is an orientation tool that tells the students what they need to do to achieve a particular performance level. As a feedback tool, put together after the teacher has graded the tasks, it has a teaching and learning function, helping students to recognize strengths which need to be built or weaknesses which need to be addressed. Before we look at what this means for multilingual assessments, let's try a small quiz to test your knowledge. If you are watching this video with friends or in a group, please write down your answers individually and pay attention to the number of the questions, as the answers will be given at the end. Let's dive into the questions. Let us look at the answers. Question 1. If you answered B, which is false, you are correct. The instructions guide the students on what they need to do to complete a task, not the input. Question 2. If you said expected response, well done. It's an expected response because the student is responding to the input and demonstrating their abilities. Question 3. B is the correct answer. Read the extract and answer the questions below. This is an example of instructions and not the input. Each of these parts of an assessment provides an opportunity for incorporating different languages in order to have a multilingual assessment. I see. In implementing a multilingual assessment, you can diversify the languages of just one part of the assessment, several parts, or all of the parts. Many factors will determine what you actually do. Wow, this makes sense. Let us look at some examples of how you can incorporate different languages to make your assessment multilingual. Depending on whether your view of multilingualism is to keep languages separate or to use them together, what your context allows for, what your goals are, you can incorporate multilingualism in your instructions in different ways. With example 1, involving English and Afrikaans, we see that there is a view of multilingualism as keeping languages separate. Whereas in example 2, that also involves English and Afrikaans, there is a view of multilingualism as mixing languages. Assuming an English teacher were interested in assessing students' written interpretation of a text, the teacher could provide the input, that is the text, in 2 or more languages, but request the students to answer in one language as seen in this example. In providing the input in more than one language, the teacher is also implementing multilingual assessment and is ensuring that language is not an obstacle in the student's reasoning. Depending on what your context allows for and what is appropriate for your pedagogical goals, the instructions to a task may permit students to provide the answers in other languages, in a language different from the official teaching language, in a mixture of languages, and so on. In this example, we can see that the first answer is written in Afrikaans only, whereas the second answer is written in a mixture of Afrikaans and English. In assessments that allow for it, a rubric is clearly another opportunity for incorporating multilingualism. Let us look at some examples. In this first example, we can see a rubric that is only in English. And in our second example, we can see that same rubric, but it's a mixture of 2 languages, thus incorporating multilingualism. With what we have learned about the different opportunities in parts of an assessment for incorporating multilingualism, raise your hand if you still think multilingual assessments is an impossible task, whether in language teaching or content teaching. Raise your hands if you are willing to try out multilingual assessments.
Created using Powtoon.